Daniel Roy.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Who has our mic? sorry, Daniel.
Oh, I'm mute,
So today
sorry.
we're going to talk about,
Hi.
oh yeah, well now, okay, so today we're going to talk about the different relief measures for businesses. Just to give you a little bit go ahead, sorry. We're going to talk about the present main programs which are available today. We'll focus on the different criteria, exceptions, and reliefs in place for those different programs. At the end of the session, we'll be answering some of your questions. We've already included in the presentation, I'd say the questions that we have the chance to be asked a lot. So those will be already took care of. But if you have any question, feel free to ask. If we start by an overview of the different programs available today, you can basically, there are 3 buckets of programs. So the first one is subsidies. Those are the most interesting measures for the different companies. So basically, the most talked about measure is the emergency wage subsidy, which actually is providing a subsidy of 75% of the wages paid by a company who can show that their revenues dropped by 30% or more. So we'll focus on that measure a lot today. There's also the temporary wage subsidy, which is a 10% of the wages paid that is directly interacting with the first one. So we'll focus on that one too. And both those measures are working with the emergency response benefit, which is the measure for the employees who can receive $2,000 per month. And there's a great lot of interaction between those programs, so we'll focus on that. Quebec is also providing a program for training called PACME, where they could give you a subsidy for 100% of your training costs and salaries. So we'll look a little bit into that one. We'll go rapidly on the Canada Emergency Business Account, which is a loan that most SMEs had the chance to apply for nowadays. But it's a $40,000 loan guarantee by the federal government to your financial institution, which doesn't bear interest. And if you're able to repay before the end of 2022, 25% of that is written off. So we'll talk about that a little more. And we'll also talk about the Canada Emergency Rent Assistance. There are a lot of other measures, more in form of loans and loan guarantees from BDC, DC, National Bank, and all the Canadian banks. You have programs from the Quebec government also. We're not going to go deep into those programs for today, but they're really important in supporting the cash flow of the company. As is the third bucket, the reliefs and deferrals of tax and installments, both federal and provincial. So like you probably already know, those installments were deferred to September 1st. And as per the GST, QST, and HST, everything was deferred to June 30. So that gives a little bit of fresh air to the companies. But basically, the most important measure, like I said before, is the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. So that subsidy is granted to the employer. That's important to understand. And basically, it's 75% of the remuneration paid, up to $847 per week per employee. And until today, actually, we knew that it was for 3 period of 4 weeks, ranging from March 15 to June 6. Now, today, our Prime Minister announced that it would be extended. We don't have any detail yet, but we can guess that they're going to extend it by 1 month for now, but we'll know more at the beginning of next week. The most important thing actually to understand from that measure is that to be able to qualify, you have to show a drop of at least 30% of your revenues for April and May and 15% for March. The eligible employers are of all sizes in all industry sectors. Actually, the only exception is probably the public sector entities. So basically individuals who are paying salaries, including trust, taxable corporations, partnership consisting of eligible employers, nonprofit, registered charities, and a bunch of other organizations covered by regulations are included as eligible employers. The decline in revenue test, which is really important to understand, is that you have to demonstrate a drop of at least 15% for March and 30% for April or May. That revenue is their revenue coming from the sales of goods, the rendering of services, and the use by others of resources of the entity for that specific period. Those revenue must be from arm's length parties. There are some exceptions, but basically it's what you're doing outside of a company group if you have one. And it excludes everything related to extraordinary items, account of capitals, and also the wage subsidies aren't included in those revenues. When you're actually showing your decline in revenue, there are two big decisions that you need to make. The first one is to choose what is going to be the reference period. So you have to compare March, April, and May of this year with last year for the same month, or you can also do it against the average of revenue earned in January and February of this year. And if you select one or the other method, you have to live with that method for the length of the program. So that one is really important to select correctly. The second thing, which is really important, is the accounting method used. So basically, when they launched the program, they were talking about using the accrual basis, but since then they also included a choice so that you're able to do it on a cash basis if it's better for you. So it takes into account the fact that some accounts are tougher to collect, and it helps also companies who are usually reporting or deferring revenues or using WIPs. So being able to use a cash basis gives a better understanding of the impact the company is actually having during the crisis. So that choice also, you have to live with it. So make sure that you use the right method. We strongly encourage you to consult on those two topics as they're really important in being able to qualify for the measure. We were talking about non-arm's length transactions. There are specific rules on those. So if you are in a group of companies and you're actually charging revenues between companies, there are specific criteria to meet and some calculations to do. So we strongly invite you to consult on those, as those calculations are a little tricky and could have a lot of impact on your capability to qualify for the program. When we're talking about a decline in revenue, the government has opened their program so that now, if you're eligible for a given period, then you will also be automatically eligible for the next period. So that's, for example, you qualify for March, then you will be also qualified for April. You will have to requalify for May, but so you have 2 months of a heads up to decide if you're bringing back your employees or keeping them. You still have, though, to apply every month for the program, but like I said, you would be already qualified. When we are talking about 75% of the wages paid, actually, there's a calculation and you're actually subsidized for the higher of two amounts, or 75% of the amount paid up to a maximum of $847 per week, or the amount which was paid before the crisis at 75%. So if you have an employee who for some reason had a reduction in his wages during the crisis, you could potentially have a 100% subsidy for that employee. And Marie-Danielle will show you with direct examples what we mean by that, but it's really important to understand that it's the maximum of the two. There's a special rule though for employees who do not deal at arm's length. So basically, if you're the shareholder of your company, your remuneration, which can be subsidized, is actually capped to the amount which was paid before the crisis. So if you, for some reason, you did not take any paycheck from your company before, you won't be able to start to pay you during the crisis or give you a raise, whatever, sorry. So basically you're stuck with the amount you were actually paying yourself before the crisis if you're not working at if you're working directly with your company, sorry. Two exceptions which are really important to understand if you have a group of company is the first one is that if you're actually usually producing consolidated financial statements, then you should use those statements to look for to see if you're able to qualify the group. And if you're able to do so, then every member of the group would be qualified for the measure. Then you have the choice. You could select to go on a company by company model rather than using the consolidated model, but that's a choice you have to do and you have to live with it. And then the same spirit, if you're an affiliated group, you could make a joint election to qualify your revenue on a global basis rather than a company by company method. So on those two topics, we also urge you to consult to make sure that you do the right choices, because you will have to live with those. So just make sure that you have a big picture before you're actually doing some your first claim, actually, because you'll live with those. When we're talking about the eligible remuneration, it includes every salary, wages, and other remuneration, except for the following. So retiring allowances, severance pay, items such as stock option benefits, the personal use of a corporate vehicle, and amounts that could be expected to be returned to the employer, or any amount paid under an arrangement to increase an employee's baseline would be excluded from the eligible remuneration. When we were talking about the previous to the crisis wages, we're actually referring to January 1st to March 15, where we would be averaging the weekly remuneration, excluding any 7 days period for which the employee did not receive any remuneration. So that's the way to fix that amount, and that's the one you're going to be comparing to the actual wages paid during the crisis. One important thing to understand is that to be eligible for the subsidy for a given employee, that employee must not have received remuneration for more than 14 consecutive days during that period. And basically, that measure is in place to work with the other ones that we will see today. There are now choices possible to reverse that, and we'll see that in details. But basically, if your employee didn't have pay for 14 weeks, at first they wouldn't be eligible to that wage subsidy. Since last week, the provincial government aligned their things with the federal, but until that date, for employees who were paid by the company but weren't working, the employer could receive a subsidy for the employment insurance, Canada Pension Plan, Quebec Pension Plan, and Quebec Parental Insurance Plan that they paid for these employees only. And it's something which has to be assessed week by week. And if that employee wasn't working for that week, those amounts are paid on top of the 847 that the company or the employer could receive for that employee. Like I said before, Quebec harmonized their measure for the health service fund. So basically it's the same approach for the same employees. So if that employee is not working, you could get a subsidy for the amount paid for HSF. Those basically tell you that it's aligned with the federal measures, so we'll skip that one. One of the things which is really important to understand is that employers may also be eligible for new employees. So basically, if you're paying new employees during the crisis, those would be eligible to the 75%, max to 847 like everyone else. The minister clearly said that they expect employers to make their best effort to pay any remaining balance on employees' salaries and to bring them back to their pre-crisis levels. But that's not an obligation, that's a wish. That's something that employers are trying to do, but you're not forced to do it to be eligible to the subsidy program. The other thing which is important to understand is that there's no overall limit. So basically, if you're paying employees and you qualify and those employees qualify, then there's no limit on the program and on the amount of subsidy that you could get. The final thing that you need to understand is that that program is based on the pay period and not on a cash basis. So basically, it starts on March 15th. So that's the day that the first day that should have been worked, or if someone was at home, it was for that period, rather than the time where that pay is gonna be actually disbursed by the company. To look a little deeper into how the qualifying period works, I will now hand the mic to Marie-Danielle.
Thank you, Pierre. Hopefully now my mic is working. So, okay, so for the qualifying periods, so to qualify for the subsidy, the employer's gross income, as Pierre mentioned it a bit earlier, must have dropped by at least 15% for the month of March and by 30% for the months of both April and May. And subsequently, following the announcement of today, it's probably going to go into June as well. The way it is determined for each period, it's going to be the period in which the month it started. So for example, my period number 1 goes from March 15th to April 11th. So I'm going to take the month of March to establish my reference period. So I'm going to compare my month of March 2020, either with the month of March 2019 or an average of the months of January and February 2020, sorry. So I need to pick either one or the other, and that selection I'm gonna have to use for each of my periods, for period 1, 2, 3, and further if the program continues. So same thing for period number 2, it starts in the month of April. So I'm gonna compare my month of April 2020 over to either what I had selected at first, so either my month of April 2019 or an average of my revenues from January and February 2020. So the reason, for example, I would want to choose the average of January and February 2020 over my prior year could be, for example, if I had a business that was very different from one year to the other, or also another example that had been brought up when the program was first introduced was, for example, if my company or my business was not established last year in March or April, then I would not have a reference period. So I could have at least January and February 2020. So also when the revenue reduction criterion is met for 1 month, it's possible to obtain the assistance for the full period of 4 weeks. So once it's established, all the salaries or all the remuneration that's been paid during that 4-week period is going to be eligible for the subsidy. So how to apply? So the eligible employers can apply for the subsidy through the CRA's My Business Account portal. The first payment should have been issued on May 5th, so the program has started. The employers will need to keep the records demonstrating their reduction in arm's length revenue, and also the records for the remuneration that's been paid to the employees. The individual that has a principal responsibility for the financial activities of the entity must attest in the application that it is complete and accurate in all material respects. That attestation must be kept into the files as well, and could be required by the CRA to be provided. We highly suggest that if the employers have not yet registered for My Business account, they should do so immediately, because it can take up to 5 to 10 business days to receive the access code by mail. So if you don't want to delay your application process and you have not yet registered for My Business account, you should do so immediately. And the application can only be submitted at the end of the period, and all the remuneration on which the subsidy is claimed need to be paid at the time that the application is submitted. So that's very important. So you cannot claim the subsidy for remuneration that you want to pay later on. It needs to have been paid at the moment where the application is submitted. The applications must be submitted no later than September 30th, 2020. So that's actually a good thing. As Pierre mentioned earlier during the presentation, there are many elections or options that you have to select. So the difference in accounting, if you want to elect to do on a consolidated basis, elections like that. So you can take a bit of time to actually evaluate what's the best method for your entity to optimize the subsidy that you'll be able to claim. So you have more time to be able to apply for the subsidy. So it could be a good option. So if you're not sure on the options that you want to claim, then you can claim your subsidy a bit later. If the application is done by a representative, including an employee that's been authorized, that person must have a signed attestation from the business or the person responsible with the financial activities of the company to be able to submit the application on behalf of the eligible employer. The payment will generally be issued within 10 business days of the application if the employer is registered for direct deposit. So a bit like the My Portal, the business account, if you are yet to register for direct deposit, something that you should consider doing so to ensure that you have the payments quicker. The payment will be issued automatically for most applications. However, they have mentioned that some applications might be selected for a review prior to paying, but most of the applications will be automatic. Penalties, so it's a pretty generous program, and it's meant to help many businesses that are struggling or that are facing challenges in terms of this pandemic. So there are indeed anti-abuse rules that have been announced by the government in order to prevent any fraudulent claims that could have been made by employers, and also to ensure that the amounts that are owed to the employees are going to be paid to those employees. The federal government is also considering creating new types of offenses for individuals, employers, or business administrators who would provide false or misleading information to obtain access to this subsidy. If the subsidy has been received and was improperly claimed, or the business was not allowed to claim it, it will have to be repaid in full. And there's also penalties that have been announced that could equal up to 25% of the value of the subsidy, and even imprisonment. So Pierre and I are accountants, so we like numbers. So we've decided to show you a little quantitative example here to better demonstrate what Pierre was mentioning, the fact that the difference in terms of the remuneration that's been going to be covered by the subsidy based on the pre-crisis weekly remuneration. So here we have 5 different employees on which we've tested the numbers. So we have here the employees are going to be paid 100% of the pre-crisis remuneration. So there's no drop in remuneration during the crisis. So like Pierre explained earlier, there's two parts to this formula that you need to consider to be able to properly calculate the wage subsidy. So part A here is going to be equal to 75% of the remuneration that's paid, maxed at $847. So here, depending on each of my employees, so my 5 employees, depending on the income level, that amount is going to be different. So here, up to employee number 3, I'm able to get my full 75% of my remuneration paid. However, for employee number 4 and employee number 5, who are at the higher level of income, I'm maxed out at $847 for my my subsidy. The second portion of my formula is going to be the lesser of two amounts. So my actual remuneration paid, maxed again at $847, and 75% of my pre-crisis remuneration. Here, since the remuneration did not decrease, it's going to be the same amount except for my employee number 4 and 5 that were capped at 847. Here it's going to be the same thing. So effectively, for employee number 1, 2, and 3, in this scenario, I'm able to get the full 75% of their remuneration as a wage subsidy. For employee number 4 and 5, I'm effectively having a subsidy of 55% and 44% respectively. Alternatively, scenario number 2, my employees get a 50% decrease in their weekly remuneration during the crisis. So here we have in my first portion of my salary, so element A, I have my same thing, 75% of my actual remuneration paid, again, maxed at $847. However, for element B, here, my 75% of pre-crisis remuneration is going to give me a higher number for my employees because they had a higher remuneration prior to the crisis. So as Pia explained, it's going to be your average remuneration for the period of January 1st up until March 15th. So in this example, I'm able to subsidize 100% for employee 1, 2, 3, and 4 of the actual remuneration paid during the crisis. So it's actually going to be helpful for some employers to have a higher percentage of the remuneration that's covered. Here, it's only on employee 5 that the employer has a portion of the salary to disperse. So the 10% temporary wage subsidy, it's a different program. So employers that might not qualify for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy may still qualify for the 10% temporary wage subsidy. So that subsidy is going to be available for small and medium businesses, and it's going to be equal to 10% of the remuneration paid between March 18, 2020 and June 19, 2020, up to a maximum subsidy of $1,375 per employee, capped at $25,000 per employer. A corporation to qualify for this temporary wage subsidy needed to have a business limit that was different than 0 for its last taxation year. So needed to have a small business deduction percentage that was attributable to your enterprise to be able to claim the temporary wage subsidy. So to be eligible, you need to be a CCPC, so a Canadian-controlled private corporation, and the taxable capital of the CCPC in the previous year must be less than $15 million. And if the corporation is a member of a group of associated corporations, the taxable capital of all the group's corporations must be less than $15 million. How do you apply for the subsidy? So it's actually a bit simpler to apply for the temporary wage subsidy. The employers must calculate the subsidy amount that they are entitled to receive themselves and reduce the payroll remittances that are payable to the CRA by that amount. They can reduce their remittances in the first remittance period that includes the remuneration that's paid for that period. So starting on March 18, 2020, up until June 19, 2020. The employers can reduce any subsequent remittances for the period until they've reached the actual subsidy limits. So the $1,375 per employee, as well as the $25,000 per employer. How does it interact with the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy? So if the employer is eligible to qualify for the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy and the 10% wage subsidy for a given period, all the amounts that are eligible to be claimed under the 10% temporary wage subsidy would reduce the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy for that same period, even if the employer did not reduce the payroll remittances for that period. So if you are eligible for the 10%, you are deemed to be claiming that subsidy. So it's important to make sure that if you are eligible, you do your remittance, you cut off on your remittances, and because otherwise you're going to be penalized in the CEWS. The amounts that are received as a taxable, they're going to be taxable government assistance. So everything that's received under the temporary wage subsidy or the CEWS are going to be considered to be government assistance, and they therefore must be included into taxable income. Also, another thing to keep in mind is that, for example, if you are eligible for some federal tax credits based on remuneration, these credits would reduce the compensation expenses that would be eligible for federal tax credits. So, for example, SR&ED credits would be reduced if you receive the wage subsidies. The Canada Emergency Response Benefit, so the CERB. So the CERB, it's actually a bit different. It's for employee. And an employee to be eligible must be at least 15 years of age. It must be a resident in Canada. And the employee to be eligible must have earned income totaling at least $5,000 in 2019 or in the 12-month period preceding the application from either employment, self-employment, a dividend other than an eligible dividend, or other amounts from a provincial parental program such as the QPP. That $5,000 does not need to have been earned in Canada. Also, the person must have ceased to work, including self-employment for reasons related to COVID-19 for a period of at least 14 consecutive days included in the 4-week period for which an application is made. During that 14 days of the initial period, the employee does not expect to receive more than $1,000 before tax from employment income, self-income, dividends, fees, royalties, or any other income provided by regulations. Sorry. You cannot receive any provincial government parental benefits. And for the subsequent 4 weeks period, does not expect to receive more than $1,000 before tax, again, from employment income, self-employment income, dividends, fees, and royalties, or any other income provided by regulations. Any special consideration? So the benefit is going to be available for a 4-week period, and 4 times that 4-week period for the period of March 15 to October 3rd, 2020. It's also available retroactively to March 15th if the application is after the loss of the employment. So for example, if the application is made on April 6th, the worker would receive a benefit up from March 15th of the period. The documentation needed, so there is no documentation needed except for a valid social insurance number at this point. And remember, keep in mind that the benefit is taxable and there are no source deductions that are made on it. It's going to need to be included into the income tax return of the 2020 tax year. How do you apply for the CERB? So it's going to be, the application have started as of April 6th on canada.ca/coronavirus. The employees can also apply through the My Account portal or by calling the 800 number that you can see here on the screen. The applications must be submitted no later than December 2nd, 2020. They are expected to receive payments between 3 to 5 business days through direct deposit or 10 days by mail. The application is for a 4-week period. And again, you have a maximum of 16 weeks that you can be eligible for the CERB. And the $2,000 payment is made once per period. So it's a full payment of $2,000 that you receive for a 4-week period. And the eligibility is going to be subsequently validated. So upon applying, you're not going to be verified. However, they might verify later on. The interaction between the CERB and the wage subsidy. So as Pierre had mentioned a bit earlier, the eligibility for the employee's wage subsidy is going to be limited to employees who have not been without remuneration for more than 14 consecutive days during each of the eligibility periods. So again, our periods are from period 1, March 15th to April 11th, period 2, April 12th to May 9th, and period 3 is going to be from May 10th to June 6th. The procedure for the payment, if, for example, you receive too much CERB or if you are deemed to be not eligible,
Oops.
There's going to be a procedure so you can refund the CERB by check. So, for example, if you determined after that you're not eligible, or if you are called back to work sooner than expected, then you could refund the CERB by check. The employers who do not qualify for the 75% or the 10% wage subsidy can decide to lay off their employees so that the employees can receive the CERB. And companies can choose for each 4-week period whether they decide to apply for the CERB or if they decide to leave for the wage subsidy, sorry, or if they decide to lay off their employees so that they can apply for the CERB. A little situation here. So I have an employee. My employee is paid as follow as of March 15th. So for March 15th to March 21st, my employee was paid. And starting March 22nd up to April 11th, my employee is been unemployed and unpaid. So the question here is, can my employee still receive the CERB as at March 15th? And does the employee have a 4-week waiting period before qualifying? So the answer here is no, my employee does not have to wait for 4 weeks. He would be eligible for the periods that would start on March 15 for the CERB because he was for more than 14 days without remuneration. So he could benefit from the CERB for that period. However, my employer could not claim the wage subsidy on the payment that's been made for March 15 to March 21st because the employee was without remuneration for more than 14 days.
All right, so to talk about, thank you, Marie-Danielle. So to talk about the Canada Emergency Commercial Rent Assistance, I'm gonna take back the mic. So basically in April 16, Justin Trudeau announced the introduction of that measure. It will provide forgivable loans to owners of mortgage commercial properties. The important thing to understand is that these loans will cover 50% of the rent payables by eligible small businesses for April, May, and June. And those loans will be forgiven if and only if the owner agrees to reduce the small business's rent by at least 75% under a rent forgiveness agreement, which will include a term not to evict the tenant while the agreement is in place. The small businesses tenant would cover the remainder, so 25% of the cost of the rent would be supported by those business. The impacted small business tenants are businesses, including NPOs and charitable, that pay no more than $50,000 in monthly gross rent per location, as defined by a valid and enforceable lease agreement. They do not generate more than $20 million in gross annual revenues, calculated on a consolidated basis at the ultimate parent level. So for a total group, you don't have more than $20 million of gross annual revenues. And then you have to either have ceased your operations related to the crisis of COVID, or at least have experienced 70% of decline in your pre-COVID-19 revenues. The terms and conditions, so basically those loans are going to be granted to the for properties that generate rental revenues from commercial real property located in Canada. You have to have a property owner impacted, which has company which are qualified as small business tenants impacted by the crisis. There must be a mortgage loan secured by a commercial rental property where you have those tenants. You have entered or will enter into a rent reduction agreement for the period of April, May, and June. That will reduce, like I said before, the tenants' rent by at least 75%. If you declare you have to have declared rental income on tax revenue for tax years 18 and or 19. And how it's going to work actually is that the forgivable loan can be applied retroactively. So property owners may still apply for assistance once the 3-month period has ended. If they can prove that they're eligible, they will have to refund amounts paid by the small business tenants for the period. The deadline to apply is actually August 31st. And the forgivable loan will cover 50% of gross monthly rent for April, May, and June. Like I said before, the property owner will pay no less than 25% of the total. So 50% by the government, 25% by the property owner, and then 25% will be supported by the small business tenant. They are still working on the measure. They're going to provide us with further details on how to claim those amounts. We're still waiting for an announcement on that. As for the other measures, you have the Canada Emergency Business Account. So basically, those are loans of up to $40,000 secured by the federal government and that you apply for with your financial institution. It's if you are working with more than one bank, actually it's the one where you have most of your operations, including your payroll, which would be the bank that would be granting you that loan. It's an interest-free loan, and if you refund it, like I said before December 31st, 2022, then there would be no interest, and they would grant you with a loan forgiveness of 25% of the amount. So basically, if you had borrowed $40,000, you would repay 30 and get $10,000 of forgiveness. If you're not able to repay by that date, then it would bear interest at 5% and would be payable over 3 years. Every financial institutions, including National Bank, put online forms so that you're able to apply directly. It's pretty straightforward. one of the most important things is that to be eligible, you have to have paid a payroll between 20,000 and 1 million, actually 1.5 million in 2019. And so you have to be able to show your the box 14 of your T4 summary of last year when you're actually applying for that loan. Quebec has a program for training where if you're training employees during the COVID crisis, they would refund 100% of your eligible expenses up to $100,000. And if it amounts to more than that, it's going to be 50% between $100,000 and $500,000. Those includes trainer fees, equipment purchases, and human resources management in regard with that program. And it would also include 100% of the compensation paid to the workers for the training, up to $25 per hour. We have to understand that this is a complement to the other measure in place. So if you are already receiving 75%, then the provincial government would do the other 25, up to $25 per hour. And the period where you're able to claim that program is March 15 until September 30 of this year. So that's a good way if you're thinking of restarting to train your people, bring them back on board and have them subsidized to do so. Now we would be at the part where we are answering your question. We did receive a few of them. So Marie-Danielle, maybe I could ask you, let's start with are non-Canadian affiliates revenue excluded from the calculation if you're looking how to establish your revenues?
So generally, like we had mentioned, it would be non-arm's length revenue. So depending, usually affiliates means that it's controlled by the Canadian corporation. So it would be part of your non-arm's length revenue. So depending on elections that you could make, it could be an option, but we would need more information to be able to give you a complete analysis on that question.
Okay, we have a couple of questions regarding the period and the actual wages considered in the March 15 to April 20 period. So can you just maybe explain a little more what they're talking about when they're talking about those wages?
Yeah, the question here, I think, is the first one, Pierre, the March 15 to April 11?
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So here there's two things you need to consider. So first you have the period of the eligibility. So the period of the eligibility here, it would be March 15 to April 11. That's where you would consider your wages or your remuneration paid during that period. It's for work that's been done during that period. So it's not the cash that's paid during that period. So for example, if you pay your employees for the day of March 15, it would count into that period. However, if you pay on March 15, the pay of the last 2 weeks that the employees worked, that would not be included into the wage subsidy. And then the comparative of month over month, you take the month in which the period starts, and that's the month that you'll be comparing, either with last year, same month, or the average of January and February 2020.
Good, thank you. Claire is asking us, is it possible to get access to the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy for period 2 if you're not qualified for period 1?
Yes. It is possible to get access to the wage subsidy for period 2, even if you have not qualified for period 1. You still need to demonstrate that you had your decrease in revenue. So for period 2, it would be the month of April. So you would need to demonstrate that you had a decrease in revenues of at least 30% in the month of April. And you would need to have a remuneration that's been paid to employees that would be eligible for the subsidy.
And even if you were qualified for that period, you would still have to claim the 10%, right?
Correct. So if you are eligible for the 10%, you are deemed to have claimed it for in terms of the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. So you would need to reduce the amount that you're eligible under the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy by that 10% that you are claiming.
Thank you. We have someone who's telling us that they made a mistake on their CEWS application.
Mm-hmm.
How are they able to make changes?
At this point, there are no change or amending process in place for the CEWS. It's been raised, this concern with finance, it's been raised with the government, saying that what happens if we make a mistake. At this point, there are no ways that we can correct those subsidies. I think that's an even bigger reason at this point to ensure that when you are applying, you get proper support, from professionals to be able to help you ensure that the claims that you are submitting are complete and are accurate, and that you are making the most out of them.
Christina is asking us, can we have our employees work for $1,000 per month and leave them on the $2,000 if our business is slow and we don't need them full time?
The CERB is actually, you can earn no more than $1,000 per month and still be able to the CERB. So technically the answer would be yes, they could earn no more. However, it's a tricky question. Let me.
Well, maybe if I can jump
Yeah.
in on that one. Actually, to be able,
Yeah.
you should. The criteria changes with the period, but for the first period, you have to be able to show that you weren't earning any revenues. At first, it was no revenues at all for 14 days. Then they let $1,000 of revenue so that someone who was still earning amounts would be able to still be able to access the program. But at the same time, if you were able to get it from the employee side, you weren't able to get it from the employer side with the subsidy. And for the months later on after that one, then it's the $1,000 for the whole month. That's the top criteria. The basic working way to do it is that if you want to be able to get your subsidy in the company or the employer, your employees should be repaying their part. And so that one would need to be reconsidered. Maybe we could have a chat with you to really understand what is the actual context of your specific situation, but you have to be careful with that one. And maybe because time's flying by, one last question. Could we find an easy one? Can I claim?
Pierre.
Yes, this one is really important, I think. Can I claim a family member working for the company?
Oh, yeah, it's a very good question. So it is possible to claim a family member. However, you need to be careful because that formula, if you want to go back here, the formula for the for someone who is not dealing at arm's length with the corporation, you're going to be limited to your pre-crisis remuneration. So that person need to have been employed by the company and prior to the crisis. To be able to get the wage subsidy, and you're going to be limited to 75% of that pre-crisis remuneration. So if that person was not paid prior to the crisis, then you would not be eligible for the subsidy. However, if the person had been with the company for a period of time and had pre-crisis remuneration, you could benefit from the subsidy up to 75% of the pre-crisis remuneration.
Thank you very much. So basically, if you need help, just understanding what program could work for you, see if you're eligible, if you're actually getting all the money you should from all those programs, and optimizing and maximizing the amounts that you would get, or if you need help preparing for doing your online applications, feel free to contact us. We'd be more than pleased to help you. Actually, we did put our contact info in the presentation, and we also are providing you with a 1-800 number. So if you have any question, feel free to call. We'll be more than pleased to help you. Sorry that we didn't have the time to answer all your questions, but like I said, if you want to talk with us, feel free to do it. So thank you very much to Netris for allowing us to be here today. And thank you to you all for being there. Marie-Danielle, good job.
Thank you. Thank you, Pierre, you too. It was a pleasure sharing this screen with you.
So Swat, back to you.
Well, thanks a lot, both of you, Marie-Danielle and Pierre. It's really interesting, and I attended this is the third time I think for the webinar, and it's really interesting for our clients to know more about the measures. And well, thank you once again, Marie-Danielle and Pierre, for all the answers and for all the content you shared. Thanks to our clients for attending. We know that you are experiencing a very special period, as all of us, I guess. Yeah, we are in this together, and we will prevail together. So just thank you for that, and thanks to the teams answering the phone calls and making sure that the clients are taken care of on a daily basis. So as I mentioned before, for all the questions regarding Netris, you can call the customer support, and we will be more than happy to answer your questions. About the platform, of course, we have our experts to help us with the measures and things like that. And yeah, for the content, it will be available. The webinar, the video of the webinar will be available on the YouTube channel of Netris, and the content or the presentation will be sent via email later on. So thank you once again for it, everyone, and have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.